Not because they want to sell it for more expensive. Not really. The filament is not very expensive. But for one reason, is because they test their own machine with that filament. They buy that filament, they make their machines, they test them together, and they know it works. And so they recommend you that you buy that filament. Maybe they make a dollar per roll on top, but that's not much. And for you, because you don't want to waste your time, you prefer to pay that filament, which is not even more expensive, but roughly a roll of filament that we sell today is around 30 pounds per kilo, maybe 29 or 32, you know, that kind of range. It's not a big deal, except one brand. There's one brand, they sell their filament for the price of gold. But except these, all others, it's roughly the same. And the thing is, you prefer to take this one. And to be honest, it's true that it works better. I mean, if I take a MakerBot and I keep some filament from MakerBot, I have 99% of chance that it will work. And if I take an Ultimaker and I take the filament from Ultimaker, 99%. If I mix them together, well, bad example because Ultimaker is not the same. But again, if we would have some good standards, we could be able to say not buy the filament from MakerBot, but buy the filament ABZ. And ABZ would be a standard, and we know whatever the brand that would fit in there. And the same for the manufacturers. They would be happy to test their filament not from one brand, but from one standard. And that would be better for everybody. So yes, I agree, especially for a young company like us, it would make our life easier if we would have standard coming earlier. Another one question where we are expecting standards is it food safe? If I 3D print a cup, is it food safe? Me as a retailer, I say, I don't know, take your risk. I've read somewhere that it is safe, but I also read somewhere that it is not. And I don't have the money and the time to invest in making my own controls and tests. So I rely on the filament suppliers, and they have to do the tests, and they say it is safe, but they don't have a standard for that. So probably we need some standards and controls and things. At the moment, there is not even a market. It's too tiny. We sell a lot of machines as per what we expected to sell. But to be honest, in terms of the global population, it's still very little. So at the moment, nobody really invested, nor us, nor the government, nobody did really invest to know if it's really, really safe for food, safe for this, safe for that. And it will come sometimes.
There's IP.
Then IP. Well, ethics is another one. Ethics, you know, ethics, I don't think it's about the private company doing some technology to interfere with ethics at the same time. It's about people. Like me, as an individual, I have my own ethics as opposed to what I'm doing or not. But in terms of company, it's a different story. And if you start mixing ethics and business, I'm not saying that they should face each other or fight each other, but I also think that they should not kind of interfere. I think it's good that some ethic committees, independently of companies, think about things. Obviously, companies want to participate, give insights, but I would be happy to participate as an individual, but not as my company. Ethics is. I keep having that question from journalists and people like, oh, 3D printing, you can make guns.
That's I wanted to.
Guns. It makes my life difficult, this guns thing, because it's not possible to talk about 3D printing to any journalist without that question coming out. Although, to be very honest, if you want to make a gun, there are probably tons of opportunities to do it, and probably 3D printing is one of them, and probably is the most expensive, the less likely to succeed, the most, likely to kill yourself before you kill anybody else. Just like the first man trying to fly, these guys, they thought it would be possible to fly. They were very, very convinced it's possible, so they tried to make some wings, and how many of them died trying? but they were right in a sense, because after a couple of years or decades, it was possible to fly, and nowadays we know exactly how, and we can fly from a country to another country. But the first guys trying, they died, and this idea of 3D printing a gun is very much like that. It's tempting. They like to do it, and they try, and they fail, and sometimes one day they will succeed. But again, it's much easier to kill somebody with anything else but a 3D printed gun. So for some reason, it's exciting for journalists, exciting for people, and they keep talking about that. And you've probably seen recently in the news, it was 1 or 2 weeks ago, that the police broke a house somewhere in Manchester or somewhere, and then they ran into it and they found a 3D printer, probably printing something that could be participating in somewhere in a gun. You've seen that? You've heard that? Me, I heard that because the same day at 2 o'clock I received a call. Hey, here is Channel 4. We want to interview you. You need to talk to us about the gun because you're an expert. So let's come to your place. And they came to my place with cameras and wanted to see it.
And then Scotland Yard came afterwards.
No, not yet, not yet.
You haven't been yet asked about
I have not been arrested.
3D printing and drones. Never mind guns.
No. But let me finish on that one because it's funny. Then I read in the news a little bit further. The same day when that police came to that place, it's true that there was a 3D printer there, and it's true that it was printing something, and nobody knows what it was actually. But the same day, they captured like 15 people, put them in jail. They had maybe 200,000 or 300,000 pounds of whatever drugs and stolen goods and things. You did not see that in the articles. The only thing you didn't see in the journal is 3D printing would be a gun, you know? And they did not mention the whole rest of the weird things that these guys were doing. So much attracted by that 3D printing gun. And I've been traveling with my printers from country to country to give talks, you know, to demonstrate, you know. And at custom they were asking, what is this? And I said, 3D printer. Oh, can you print a gun? Be serious. You printing a bit like this would take an hour. Printing a gun, if even it would be possible, that would take 2 days. I mean, you jump in a plane and you would start your printer. So you don't even have a socket in the plane to plug the printer, and then you would spend how many time to, you know, it makes no sense. Be serious 2 minutes. Sorry, I've got a question on my right here. Yeah.
After visiting you in
Yeah.
August,
Yeah.
I saw a two-time TV program concentrating on 3D printing for guns.
Yeah.
One was that, just to tell you the story, a guy was shot with a gun, and we had a tough time trying to figure out which gun that belonged to, because for some reason when you print the gun using this, the spiral on the bullet it's not the same as you use a metal thing, right?
Yeah, possibly.
And then so for a while they never know how to deal with it. But the fault was that if you shoot that gun twice, the gun will burst. That's how they caught the crook, because he damaged his hand when he shot it.
Sarah.
I just want to say, when you talk about the feasibility of printing a gun, wasn't the whole the initial thing that brought together 3D printing of a gun? Was there that guy in America who decided to make what you needed to print a gun in 3D and got the 3D print and then released it online for
Yes,
anyone to
that
see?
was the initial big thing, yeah.
But he did actually produce the gun.
Yes, but not with an affordable, cheap plastic 3D printer, with an expensive, big machine printing in metal. Because the rule in the US is that, you know, they kind of say that they kind of regulate guns and track them. But in fact, their rules, if you read them carefully, say that the cannon and several parts are not actually tracked. The only part that is actually tracked is the one where you actually hit the bullet, which is making sense in a way. So these guys have not printed the whole gun. They have printed that part, and then they mounted on it some real guns parts. that they really actually bought in stores, but they are not tracked. So that was the first thing. So back in November 1 year ago, the guy would be able to do it and shoot, and boom, it blows after just one shot. And then we had some news in December or January where he could shoot like 2, 3, 4, but then it blows. And then the new news in March was that he could empty a full, maybe 15 or 25 cartridge, and then after that, when you put the second one, then it blows. So it was about printing that particular central part of the gun with an expensive, and now, because that has been in the news, that new people try to do that with inexpensive machine costing 1,000 or 2,000, because that's a new, just if you do some record, then somebody wants to beat you and do something more difficult and more, so they will try, and you know what? At some point they will do it, and no, it is not a good reason to stop 3D printing at all. It is just for some thoughts about ethics, about rules, about regulation, about traceability, and there is nothing that will prevent 3D printing. I mean, that would be, it's like, when there is some wind coming, some fool try to stop the wind, and some others try to build windmills. I'm more looking into trying to build windmills.
And not arguing anything about guns, yeah? But you mentioned glasses, eyeglasses.
Yes.
Could you make measure your eyes? Yeah, could you make them print the
lens?
glasses, the lenses and the frame?
The frame, yes, we do that. We have them in the store.
Yeah,
Come at Selfridges, you can buy them.
The whole thing.
The lens is not yet. Not yet at our level, although I know that it is technically possible. I'm not quite sure if it will be anytime sustainable, makes sense, but technically yes, but not with anything affordable at the moment. And the frames, yes, for sure, we have 24 different models at the moment in Selfridges with our store. You can come and buy one, and they are optically compliant. So you buy a pair, you go to your optician, and you have your lenses mounted on them. That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay,
The
so
whole
the,
thing you can't
the
do
live webcast is going to go too far from
Excellent.
the time. Carl, if it wasn't to be known that, not to be possible, sorry, that to know that somebody has an intention to print a gun with a 3D printer, would you know about it? Anyway, never mind about it, because that's the whole point. Because not you, but this current surveillance and intelligence and possibility of stepping noticing everything that one does, which is what bothers us about. Wouldn't that be known anyhow? And that could form part of public security.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be a bit of an idiot if you started tweeting about doing something illegal like building a gun, to be honest. But I mean, I just want to draw out what I saw to be a main implication of the kind of, when we're talking about whether it's social media or 3D printing, these disruptive innovations which are changing society in powerful ways, is not only what's happening today, but I mean, this has to be future casting. We have to look at, if we're building a regulatory regime to make the world safe in the 3D printing age, we have to think about what 3D printing will be able to do in 5 or 10 years' time, right? So like, dwelling purely on the inability or expensiveness of 3D printing to today manufacture a firearm or other kind of things, I think is wrong. I mean, but that's not always going to be the case, right? Like social media, these are technologies which are galloping forward at almost unbelievable pace.
Yeah.
Driven by almost unbelievable amounts of innovation and money. So yeah, I mean, that's why for me, and what I was kind of like trying to emphasise is that it's not the technology itself which is the important question here. It's the structures that you put on that technology, surround that technology with, to make sure that its overall contribution to society is a net positive, is beneficial. Because you're completely right about one thing, whether it's 3D printing or social media or lots of other innovations we haven't spoken about today, which we could have done, you cannot turn back the clock. These are things which are going to be adopted, they're going to be used, the question really is, how do we come to terms with that as a society and as a world, really?
Okay. Well, on this note, only Australia has
Yeah, I
a
was
point.
just going to say that we've been making guns for generations now, and we haven't been using 3D printers, and it's very easy to make them on a lathe and a milling machine and in a workshop, and as every third world country knows. So 3D printing really is nice, but it's not going to be mass
The
production
chosen
as such.
tool
Yeah.
for that.
So I don't
Not
see
for
3D
games
printing.
for sure.
Not for that.
Not for games. Not for games for sure.
Musa.
Yes, please. At first I thought it was science fiction, but now that I know it's not science fiction, the question is,
Is it because of
why
that?
did it take so long to have this type of innovation?
To be honest, it's a very good one because technically it's not that difficult. Not really, it is not. One of the clues for that is patent. So patent is a new disease, I like to call it. This technology, the one that we use in the affordable cheap 3D printers that we sell today for 1,000 something, was protected by a patent for years. And that patent gone public after like the 25 years as usual. And as soon as it has gone public, the price has dropped by tenfold. And the reason being that, in fact, it was a brilliant idea, but not very difficult to implement. So many people knew that it was possible, and they could do it in their own garage, but they could not sell it. It was forbidden by the patent. But you could do it for yourself. So you could prepare, you could work on it, and you could be good at it. As soon as the patent drops, go, you can sell. And so that's the reason it has been so quick between the end of the patent and today, where we have that MakerBot company, which you have probably heard about, doing that black machine that we sell. They sold last year for $10 million last year in revenue, not in benefit, in revenue, which is something, but not that big deal. Yeah, that company has been acquired by Stratasys for 600 million. Who buy a company for 60 years of revenue? Like this, you know? And this is just an example. You know? So patents is probably the one. And another one example I can give you is the printer that we use in our store to make those figurines I was mentioning, Mini U we call them. To make the Mini U's, we use a big printer that is for sale for something like 50,000. This big one, printing in color, brilliant, quickly, it works. But if you look into the technology itself, it's basically a 2D printer, inkjet, where you just replace the ink by some dyed glue or glued ink, I don't know how you want to call it. And instead of printing on the paper, you print on a powder. So you have a layer of powder, very thin, 100 microns, a tenth of a millimeter, and a 2D printer, instead of spitting some ink on paper, it spits some glue on powder. Not a big deal. And when it's done, you have another layer of the same height on top, and you play a game, and you have the whole lot going down by tenths of millimeter. Not a big deal. I mean, it's not some rocket science technology. It's not going to the moon. It's just like a 2D printer where you replace the paper by powder. Okay, there is some fine tuning, probably. The ink is not any ink, and the glue is not any glue, and the powder is probably some powder. But it doesn't make sense to sell that for 50,000 unless you have a patent protecting you. As soon as that patent will fall, stop recording, please. As soon as that patent will, no, because I'm a partner with them, so the price will drop by 2, by 3, by 4. I don't know. I mean, the technology itself doesn't. You know. You can record now.
In foresight terms, do you see this happening like cell phone markets where it devolves to less than 10 players worldwide?
Oh, this is too much for me. I cannot go into that kind of speculation. I don't know. We are beginning in something. We are today in 3D printing pretty much like where we were in computers in 80. If you remember 80, we had, well, I had my first computer, it was a ZX Sinclair. And at that time we had Sinclair, Commodore, Atari, Spectrum, blah blah blah. None of them survived the next 5 years. Just none of them. Apple has survived, but you know how. I mean, they have kind of died and then they have revival. You know, not very much. And IBM had to sell their own computer things to Lenovo and things. So none of these guys on the market at that moment have really survived it, but new players have come in and they have succeeded. And I think we are almost there in terms of 3D printing. They are not all of them compliant together. Still, Ultimaker is using that 3 mil filament, and all others have agreed on a 1.75 mil. Well, I don't want to go too confused, but we are at the very beginning. It's like mushrooming. They have new company every month and some dying, and so we are at the beginning. It's too early to say where we are going.
Another question, isn't additive manufacturing a larger field than this?
What was that?
Additive manufacturing.
Manufacturing?
Additive.
Oh yeah, additive manufacturing in a whole, yeah? Yeah, yeah. Well, additive manufacturing and 3D printing is pretty much today merged into the same either. However, it's not really true, I agree. So additive manufacturing would be a bit more comprehensive than just 3D printing, but 3D printing is a bad name, so not
Okay, well, I suppose if we weren't to have an insight of 3D printing, and tomorrow by the same time we'll have another insight, we would be quite sleepy by now. So that was my tactic, to have something right at the end to wake up and stimulate everybody. But one thing that is 3D printing probably started up is a movement around the makers movement. And the makers movement, you probably will find out, we don't have time now to speak about, also relates to makers and learning, and this idea of new type of learning, because you're making a new learning. And tomorrow probably, in the afternoon, we may go a little bit into that. You may not be here, but there are so many dimensions around the 3D printing or visual manufacturing and so on that are useful in relation to advice, because in relation to leveraging, in relation to how nations could succeed rather than fail. So thank you very much, Sylvain. And and Deputy Prime Minister, you have the last word.
Yeah, no, I wanted just to appreciate the last presenter, but not only him, but of course the way we have been sharing our experiences. You know, every time I come to this meeting, I go back a different person in terms of thinking and looking at issues. Now, somebody said today, my brother from Zimbabwe, that this is another talking shop, but talking shop that really educates you. It's not a talking shop like those that don't educate. We every time you get exposure, and it is important that specifically those who attend this meeting to know that you are not really losing, we are gaining. And go back home, there are quite a number of these ideas that we can use when we are doing our job, both public and in private sector. It's so important. So I want just to thank the members for the active day and the way we have interacted. Thank you very much.
Thank to you. So do you want to, for
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for your good comments on what I said, and I wanted to say that if you want to the real printer really printing was how it works, and also you see those marvelous like 3D printed lamps and glasses and whatever we
Very good. And my ambassador will just pay my meeting. Thank you very much.
There are smart drinks if you want. There's a long day, long interactions. You are in the garden room, and then tomorrow morning.